A subway ride home quickly turns into a nightmare when over 500 passengers get trapped in a flooded tunnel between two stations. With the water rapidly rising inside the carriages, their entire lives flash before their eyes. And as the water reached their necks, hopes for rescue are fading. But how could such a life-threatening situation possibly unfold on a routine subway commute? Why was there no emergency response? And was this a natural disaster or a man-made catastrophe after all? In late July 2021, the city of Zhengzhou, China, was struck by a devastating storm, an event of unprecedented scale that would push the city's infrastructure beyond its breaking point. In just 72 hours, Zhengzhou received over 23 inches of rain, nearly a year's worth. Conditions peaked on July 20th, and the Meteorological Bureau issued severe rain warnings. By late afternoon, the situation took a catastrophic turn as rainfall rates spiked to over 8 inches per hour. Streets transformed into gushing rivers, with water reaching over 3 feet deep in some areas, sweeping away vehicles. The flooding caught many residents off guard, trapping them in workplaces or vehicles. With roads underwater, returning home by car or bus was impossible. The only way to commute was by subway. However, concerns grew whether the subway system could handle such severe flooding from above ground. Subway systems in cities like Zhengzhou have been engineered to withstand floods by sealing off impacted stations while keeping other sections operational. Initially, the subway continued running on July 20th, and passengers made over 1 million trips despite the intense rainfall. But as the day progressed, water began breaching, overpowering pumping capabilities at multiple stations and causing power outages. What was designed to withstand extreme conditions soon proved to be no match for the sheer magnitude of this unrivaled downpour. By 4 p.m., when the rainfall level reached its maximum, subway authorities decided to close and seal the stations most threatened by the flood, keeping the rest of the subway operational. Among the lines still functioning was Line 5, the busiest in the system, accounting for more than 30% of the entire subway traffic. Closing this line would prevent tens of thousands of people from reaching their homes, which was something city officials could not afford. Despite Zhengzhou turning into a virtual lake, with streets completely submerged, Line 5 continued to operate. But as is often the case in disasters of this magnitude, the gravest threat would emerge from an entirely unexpected quarter. 4:50 p.m. As the rain fell relentlessly, scores of commuters boarded train number 0501 on Line 5 at the Jinkai Center Square station. Relieved to have caught the ride and anticipating a safe journey home, none of the passengers knew they were embarking on a disastrous trip. 5:21 p.m. The first hint that things could go wrong happened when the emergency brake system suddenly stopped the train. As it turned out, the system was triggered for an unknown reason, and after a couple of minutes, the driver restarted it and continued down the track. 5:40 p.m. The train reached Haitansi Station, stopping for several minutes, allowing passengers to disembark and others to board. After this stop, it resumed its journey to the next station, Shakulu, 0.6 miles down the track. Less than 2 minutes later, the train was yet again stopped by the emergency brake system. However, it was for a good reason this time, as the water started running down the tracks. Unable to proceed to the next station, the driver attempted to reverse course and return the train to the safety of Haitansi Station. But merely 300 feet into their retreat, the train was again stopped by an emergency brake system. Now it was stuck, unable to go forward or back. At this point, an already precarious situation took a devastating turn as the water running down the tracks started to rise. What seemed strange, however, was the sheer volume of water coming from the direction of Shakulu Station up ahead. Could that station have suffered a breach, allowing floodwater to pour from the surface? Surely standard protocols should have triggered its immediate closure, sealing it to prevent the inflow. But the truth was, the water was coming from another source. 3 miles away from Shakulu Station, Water had been piling up around the Wulongkou parking lot for trains operating on Line 5. Because it was built in a lower-lying area, the train lot was encircled by a retaining wall to protect it from flooding. However, the quality of the wall was inadequate to withstand the amount of rainfall. As the pressure increased, the wall gave way and let a torrent of water pour into the lot. From there, it flowed through the subway tunnel, downhill past Shakulu and toward the track section where train number 0501 was trapped. Inside the train were more than 500 anxious commuters. The water started to breach into the sixth carriage and quickly reached the ankles of passengers. Trapped on the upward slope leading to the Shakulu station, the water started entering the last carriage. It was then that the nightmare truly began. 6:30 p.m. Aware of the unfolding situation, the train driver rushed to the rear carriages, instructing passengers to move to the front. He led a group of people to the first carriage, where they managed to open the train door. They climbed the emergency walkway and started walking toward the station. Luckily for them, the water had not yet reached the walkway, and the passengers could still use it. However, on the narrow platform, they had to walk slowly, minding each step. The fast-flowing torrent of water was rushing in just inches below their feet. Sadly, a man slipped and fell into the water. His body would only be recovered 6 days later, after the waters receded. The group led by the train driver reached the safety of Shakulu Station, prompting other passengers to follow their lead. However, the walkway soon became unsafe, with the water level rising rapidly. Discouraged, a group that made it halfway toward Shakulu Station had to return to the train. They shut the door and hoped for the best. Most passengers had moved to the front of the train, where the water was still manageable. But seeing the water streaming past the train did not instill hope. Everyone inside the train was trying to call for help in some way. Some were dialing emergency numbers. Others were trying to reach the rescue service through friends and family. Unfortunately, there was no response. The city's emergency call center had only 11 staff members on duty that evening, struggling to respond to the scale of the disaster. As minutes passed, the water level inside the train reached passengers' knees, then their waists, and very soon they found themselves neck-deep in the water. When the power went out, the atmosphere descended into chaos. The blue emergency light only added to their feelings of despair and anxiety. People started screaming for help, while others were sending farewell messages to their loved ones, believing they would not survive the day. 9 p.m. By this time, the train passengers had all packed into the front 3 carriages. Yet even there, the water reached their chests and necks. Outside the train, the water level had already passed above their heads, virtually submerging the train underwater. As it seemed, it was just a matter of time before it would fill the carriages to the roof. But that was not the only danger threatening the passengers. The fear of suffocation now bolstered their fear of drowning. Due to the rising water, the level of oxygen inside the carriages dropped so much that passengers started showing signs of hypoxia. Facing a seemingly hopeless situation, people resorted to desperate measures to save themselves. One passenger, gripped by panic, tried to break a glass door, but others managed to restrain him. Had he succeeded, water from the outside would have flooded the carriage within seconds. The trapped passengers finally caught a lucky break when the floodwaters outside reached their highest point and stabilized. It similarly halted the relentless rise inside the train. Additionally, the enormous water pressure had caused the train to derail and tilt slightly, raising one side higher. Passengers quickly realized the top windows on the elevated side now peaked above the waterline. Breaking those windows would ventilate the cabin. As soon as the first window shattered, passengers could feel the rush of fresh air streaming over their heads. Although the situation was still far from bright, at least now they had enough air. Nearly 4 hours after the train stalled on the tracks, help finally arrived. There was no end to passengers' joy when they heard the steps of rescue workers walking on top of the carriages. Responders handed tools to the passengers to break additional windows and improve ventilation. Minutes later, they entered the cabin through the elevated driver's cab. The first to be evacuated were pregnant women and children. One by one, others followed. Holding tightly to the improvised handrail, passengers moved upstream. Although the water flow had slowed compared to a few hours earlier, it still ran dangerously fast. In the end, with the help of rescuers who pushed, pulled, and even carried passengers, everyone reached the safety of the Shakulu station. There, a small army of medical personnel and volunteers stood ready to triage the evacuees, most suffering from exhaustion, hypothermia, and oxygen deprivation after standing in neck-deep water for hours. While the grueling 5-hour rescue operation ultimately brought most passengers to safety. Before long, the public demanded to know why the subway system seemed completely caught off guard by the flood. In the following days, it became clear that authorities were attempting to minimize the gravity of the situation and deflect accountability. But it was undeniable. The Zhengzhou Metro flooding stemmed from a chain of systemic errors, oversights, and blatant disregard for warnings. Firstly, no one paid attention to the warnings issued by the Zhengzhou Weather Bureau. On July 17th, 3 days before the incident, their experts announced that heavy rainfall was coming that would cause a collapse in traffic and city functioning. By July 20th, they had issued 13 more alerts, 5 of which were code red. However, the city authorities either paid no attention to these warnings or did not want to raise panic among the population. In any event, on July 20th, when the storm hit Zhengzhou, its citizens all showed up for work. Even worse, authorities failed to warn the public that the city flood defense was on the verge of collapsing. A prime example was the Wulongkou train lot, from where the floodwaters entered the subway tunnel. Its only protection was a poorly constructed 3-foot brick wall. The investigation also found that parts were made of temporary construction barriers with barely any water-blocking function. Compounding issues, an open drainage ditch running alongside the lot should have channeled excess rainfall into nearby rivers. But city planners had narrowed this canal along its entire length to make way for a 6-lane road, drastically reducing its capacity. This oversight proved disastrous when the ditch overflowed. The rollout of emergency services also came under the spotlight. Were they just ill-prepared? And why did the rescue take so long? When passengers had to abort evacuating and became trapped because of rising floodwaters, the subway operations department didn't report this to the main office until an hour later. This delayed the rescue efforts. In the end, it took rescue teams over 3 hours just to reach the stranded train after the initial emergency call. In an online post, an anonymous subway worker expressed that the on-site decision-making leaders were unfamiliar with the actual conditions and did not respond promptly. From the moment water began backflowing into the track area to when it overflowed the track base, then the track surface, until it was impossible to operate the trains, until the power had to be cut off due to the electrified network, and until the evacuation platforms were submerged, leaving no hope for survival. This entire process did not happen instantaneously. There was time and many opportunities. The decision-makers hesitated and did not seize these opportunities. Another significant oversight involved the subway train design itself. Most Chinese metro systems equip their trains with emergency doors that allow passenger evacuation via life ladders in escape tunnels in crisis situations. However, Zhengzhou authorities opted for an alternate, more humane approach: escape walkways alongside the tracks. What they failed to account for was the risk of these walkways becoming submerged and impassable during severe flooding, effectively eliminating the only planned evacuation route. Additionally, the train's outward opening doors proved impossible to operate against the forceful rush of water. The Zhengzhou Meteorological Bureau described the flood as a once-in-a-thousand-year rainstorm, while officials in Hunan province claimed it was a once-in-5,000 years event, hinting that the disaster was beyond human control. Meteorologists expressed skepticism about those claims, while others have found clearer words. While a natural disaster did occur, human error is definitely the main cause. The operational leadership was afraid to make decisions, trying to preserve their positions without adding trouble for themselves. In response to the disaster, the Chinese Ministry of Transportation initiated a nationwide inspection of subway systems, focusing on their emergency plans for extreme weather events. The government arrested individuals found responsible for significant legal and disciplinary breaches. Officials overseeing the ill-fated parking lot, Line 5 construction project managers, emergency response management, and metro operations were arrested. Zhengzhou's mayor, the deputy party secretary, and other top city authorities received disciplinary punishments like warnings, demotions, or outright dismissal for their failures. The 14 victims on the subway represented just a fraction of the broader tragedy that had befallen Zhengzhou. Across the city, devastating flood left 302 confirmed dead, while 50 others remained missing and unaccounted for. On the first anniversary of the Henan flood, no official commemorative activities were held. Still, many people laid flowers near the subway stations to commemorate the victims. On Chinese social media, pictures and videos of mourning were removed or blocked. Watch this episode next if you found this video interesting. Please add a like and leave a comment if you want to support the channel.